The Gabe Molina Podcast.
And in 2010, well, I guess prior to that, you had a little run-in with your own department, right? Doing some research on you, there was a gun that was sold. How many guns? There was only one gun that was part of the investigation, right? The one that went into Mexico, or did they add the others afterwards?
Well, they started with one gun.
Okay.
I got a phone call from an ATF agent, and I knew him because his son and my son had played T-ball together, and I considered him a friend. And he called me up and he said, "Hey, did you used to own a Barrett serial number 20488, 82A1?" And I said,
That's
yes.
kind of ominous that he knows the serial number.
Yeah. And I said, "Yeah, I owned that about a year ago or 8 months ago. I don't know exactly why." He said, "Well, it was found in Mexico. We're trying to figure out how it got over there." I said, "Okay." I said, I have some records at home. I was in Dallas on a TDY from El Paso. So,
that's where your station is, was it?
Yeah,
El Paso? Okay.
El Paso was my whole career.
Gotcha.
And so I was out in Dallas doing some training, and I was out on TDY. I called my wife, and I said, "Hey, can you look in my records and check if I used to own this gun? The serial number's 20488. And she said, "Yeah, you did." And I said, "Did I sell it?" She goes, "Yeah, you sold it to Armando Rodriguez." I said, "Okay." So I called.
So you were keeping pretty good record of your guns.
Yeah. So, and let me explain why I did that. I started collecting guns when I was in the military. And I realized that if somebody broke into my apartment and those guns went missing, I wouldn't have a way to report them unless I knew their serial numbers.
Right.
Or I knew their make and their model and their serial number.
That's good habit for all gun owners to keep track of that stuff.
Well, you would think so. But then the ATF will turn around and use that on you later, as you'll hear in my case. So I started keeping all those documents in my computer. And then a couple of years later, my computer crashed. Couldn't get any of that information out. So then I went to a gun store owner and I said, "Hey, how do you keep track of your records? Because if you keep them in a computer and it crashes, you lose all that information." He goes, "Well, we have these books. They're called A&D, Acquisition and Disposition Books. And they have a spot for the make, model, serial number, date purchased, amount purchased, all this different stuff. You can put notes in there." And so I bought some of those books. I asked him, "Hey, do I have to be a dealer to have that book?" And he said, "No, you can go on Amazon.com or wherever and get them." So I did. And I kept track of my guns. Well, when he called me and said, did you used to own this gun?" I said, "Yeah, I sold it to Armando Rodriguez. He's a deputy sheriff in El Paso County. He's a good guy. I've known him for years. And I sold the gun to him." And he said, "Well, what did he do with it?" I said, "I have no idea."
Ask him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can call him up and ask him. And he said, "Okay, we're going to."
And so people understand that's perfectly legal.
Yes, sir.
At least in the state of Texas. Is it everywhere, Gary, or just in the state?
Several states. Florida,
Okay.
I know Florida for sure.
Which is basically, I buy a gun, I use it, I don't want it anymore, or I don't have a use for it. I bought 4 more. I want to sell one off. Legally, I can sell that to you, and now that's in your possession. And there isn't a requirement that says, "Hey, I've got to keep track of this gun."
No bill of sale, no nothing.
Nothing.
Right.
Yep.
So there's nothing illegal about that.
And so what makes it illegal is if you know that the person, for instance, right now as I sit here today, I'm a convicted felon. I have 6 felony convictions on my record. Gary is not a convicted felon, but he has a gun. And he says, "Hey, John, if you want to buy this gun, I know you're a convicted felon, but if you want to buy this gun, give me $600. I give him $600. Well, he's just broken the law because he knows I'm a prohibited person, and I just broke the law because I know I'm a prohibited person and I'm in possession of a firearm.
And that's only because he has knowledge of your history.
That's correct.
If he doesn't, and you don't disclose any of that,
and if you're a private citizen, you have no requirement to go out and vet each person.
check.
You
Gotcha.
can't. You can't do a background check. You're not a law enforcement agent.
okay.
So the gun sale that I did to Armando was perfectly legal. What I didn't know was Armando had taken that gun to El Paso, to one of the gun stores in El Paso, and put it on consignment. He never told me that. So,
And that's pretty common too. I
And that
don't want to
is-
slow you down, but I want people to understand that all these things are pretty common.
Very
If
common.
you go to a gun store and you see something's on consignment, somebody is basically asked the gun store, "Hey, can I sell this gun here?" The gun store says, "Okay, I'll sell it to you, and then I'll take a percentage of the sales once we're done." So that's another common thing that happens.
and it's very common with guns like a 50 caliber Barrett. because that's a $10,000 to $12,000 rifle. Not everybody walks into the gun store with $10,000 or $12,000 to buy a rifle.
Right.
So that's the place that's going to get the most visibility and probably get the most, benefits, the highest amount of money.
And they're probably going to get the right buyers too, right?
Yes,
it
sir.
may take you forever to find that buyer, and where a gun store might find them pretty quick.
And a gun store is supposed to do a background check on that person, fill out a ATF form 4473. So they're supposed to document it. Now, in my case, I sold person-to-person sale to Armando Rodriguez. He put it on consignment at the gun store. The gun store owner was an informant for the ATF. He was working for them. He sold it to a known gun trafficker that was under ATF investigation at the time, and they let it walk to Mexico.
Okay, let's pause for a second. Let me ask you this. That gun store owner, why is he working for the ATF? And is that common, or was that a rare thing? But why was he working with the ATF to do what he was doing?
Okay, so in my 14 years in the FBI, I worked narcotics, then I went on to sniper and SWAT, and I worked Special Operations Group. It is common for law enforcement, both at the state, local, federal level, to have informants, CIs, people that help them with their investigations. Those people are out there in the world of crime, and they report back to the FBI or to ICE or to whomever, and they provide intel.
So real quick, for somebody like me, if somebody is an informant, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've done something wrong and law enforcement's flipped them. They're just an informant because they're in that area.
So there's several different reasons that people become informants. One could be because they got arrested, and they're working off their charges. Instead of going to prison, the government says, look, if you're trafficking drugs, as an example, if you're trafficking drugs and you get caught, and they say, look, if you can give us 5 other people and we take down 5 loads, we'll tell the judge to go easy on you on this case. So there are some people that are like that, and there are some people that are like you that are just a good American citizen that says, hey, it's my duty to stop terrorism, or my duty to stop gun trafficking, or my duty to stop drugs, and I'm going to provide this information. Some of them do it for money. We would pay informants $50,000, $100,000, several $100,000 if they gave us really good intel.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
The FBI, I can tell you this, the FBI, if you go to the FBI and you say, hey, I know somebody who is a potential domestic terrorist and I think he's going to do a bombing or a shooting or anything else, that's valuable information to the FBI because we're there to protect lives. So some people do it for the right reasons. They don't want anything. Some people do it for money. And some people are motivated because they have a charge or a criminal case against them, and they want that to go away.
Gotcha.
Now, in this particular case, the ATF informant that owned that gun store, he had gotten in trouble because a civilian contractor was in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was stealing government equipment from soldiers, weapons, night vision, thermals, all kinds of sensitive items. He shipped them back to the United States, sent them to that gun store, and he would sell them to anybody who had the money, to the cartel, to drug traffickers, to human traffickers, to anyone that could afford to pay for them. They got caught, and they both became informants for the ATF.
Yo, Barry,